Thank you. So I have introduced myself. I'd also like to introduce Mary and Greg. Mary is from Arcadis and Greg is from One Architecture, and they'll be joining us as well.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Greg. I'll give over a brief introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mary and Greg to go into a bit more detail about our scenarios and the types of actions that we are proposing. And then we look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Are we still transitioning? Okay. We'll get started then. So just a brief reminder about the meeting guidelines. Please remain on mute unless you're speaking. We don't want to all be talking on top of each other, but please feel free at any time to present any questions or thoughts that you may have in the chat box. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. And there will be some portions where we're going to be presenting, and then others where we're going to open it up for questions, comments, and we want to hear from you. So in those times, again, please be conscious of not speaking on top of each other. If you'd like to speak, you can either use the raise hand icon or indicate in the chat box. We will call on you as we see you, and please acknowledge everyone's time. If you find yourself speaking too frequently, consider giving someone else a chance. If you're comfortable with it, we'd love to see you, so feel free to turn your camera on. If not, that's okay. And we look forward to a lively discussion, and we want to hear about your experiences. So what we're going to cover now is, as we mentioned, the West Jersey City or Hackensack breakout, which will include the west side of Jersey City, as well as Jersey City Heights. And we want to talk about what is important and what is at risk in our neighborhood. What are some of the important community assets and critical infrastructure that is important to us. So we're going to talk about the three scenarios: individual initiative, shared responsibility, and regional coordination. And for each of the scenarios, we're going to talk about possible actions that can be implemented to reduce flooding. And as a result of those actions, and also thinking about the alternative, if no action is taken, how the area might change. We want to talk about the key considerations of each. And again, we definitely want to open it up and hear what everyone thinks. In the discussion, in the discussion, we're going to talk about what's most important to advance, what you like from what we're presenting and what you think we should go forward with. Or conversely, if there's something that you think is not a good fit for our area, please let us know. Lindsay had brought up this quote in the beginning, but I really like it. So I want to just say it again, that we, have some tools and ideas, but we can serve sort of as a carpenter, but this is really your house. This is your neighborhood, and we want to all work together and hear from what you have to say to really craft a plan that's going to work for everyone. And again, we're breaking this down into, from our greater region, we're going to look at more of a neighborhood scale or level so that we can get into a little bit more detail. Okay, let's talk about the west side. So a little bit about our area here, west side of Jersey City, and we're going to get into Jersey City Heights as in just a moment. The area is so large, we kind of like broke it into two. So this area is really defined by its waterfront presence along the Hackensack River. But if you're living in the neighborhood, you might actually not feel as much of a connection to the waterfront because it's kind of cut off in some ways by the Route 440 and 1 and 9 corridor that goes through the entire area here. But there are some areas to access the waterfront, including Lincoln Park. It's a great recreational resource in the neighborhood. We refer to it as the jewel of the county park system. And the western portion of it has a restored wetland right along the Hackensack River. There's also the Bayfront redevelopment area, which shall be in progress to build a whole new community there, and the Joyers Point or Society Hill neighborhood right along the waterfront there. So some things that we've heard through this planning process and some of our initial outreach is, again, that access to the waterfront is very important. We hope that, we can further expand on this and continue to provide more access. As I had mentioned, our county's vision through the Hackensack River Greenway plan. We hear the value of public transportation throughout our region. We have the Hudson and Light Rail going through part of the neighborhood, and that's going to be ultimately expanded even further west to Bayfront and along the Hackensack River waterfront. Again, we talk about the importance of parks, but there's definitely some things that we'd like to expand upon in the neighborhood, including have an enhanced pedestrian and bicycle experience. Hopefully further the implementation of the Jersey City Bike Master Plan and add more bike lanes, and definitely a desire to see more green space, trees, and green infrastructure throughout the neighborhood.
Kevin, can we just pause for a moment to switch translators?
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan.
Vamos a pausar
Okay,
para cambiar de
we should
intérprete.
be all set. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Now we'll focus on, this part of the neighborhood's a little bit split as well. We have the lower portion along the Hackensack River waterfront, which is defined by the former PSE&G plant, which is now a redevelopment site. This is the one portion of Jersey City, which is within the New Jersey Meadowlands. And part of this is within the jurisdiction of the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority. So it's another agency to work with in terms of implementing land use and other changes. And then you slope upwards as you're going east, and on top of the Palisades, we have the Jersey City Heights neighborhood. It has the JFK Boulevard runs through the neighborhood. You also have the Central Avenue business corridor, which is sort of the center of the community. We also heard a lot about the importance of parks in this neighborhood, such as Washington Park, Leonard Gordon Park, and we're looking forward to opening up the Jersey City Reservoir further to more recreational opportunities. And again, looking to enhance the pedestrian bicycle experience and add more green space within this area. Is there anything about these two neighborhoods Is there anything else that's important that you think we should highlight about them? Feel free to mention in the chat box, and we can talk about them a little bit further. So to talk about the risk context of our neighborhoods here. So we're susceptible to both rainfall, flooding, and coastal impacts. You can see that being for the western part of the neighborhood along the Hackensack River, you'll see somewhat of a potential for storm surge flooding. However, due to the natural slope and elevation of the area, the flooding doesn't extend too far inland. It seems to stay mostly west of 440 and Route 1 and 9. So don't go to the Hudson Mall when there's a hurricane, but the eastern neighborhoods, thankfully, don't see too much in that respect. But you'll also notice that the Bayfront redevelopment is not demarcated as being so susceptible to flooding, and that's because it's going to be intentionally elevated above the future flood level. But if you take a look at sort of the more blue-purple color, you'll see that a lot of the roadways throughout the neighborhoods are susceptible to flooding from rainfall events. And so it's definitely important to keep that in mind and, target our infrastructure appropriately. Similar with the Jersey City Heights and Meadowlands portion, you'll see that storm surge will really affect the lower lying portions along the river. And then Jersey City Heights, in the name, we have heights, you think of it as an elevated place, but even there, you'll see that it is susceptible to certain, sort of low-lying areas that, our roadways and other transportation corridors can flood. So it's definitely important to consider, the effects that these can have and ways to prevent it. So we'll introduce here the different scenarios, the individual initiative, the shared responsibility, and the regional coordination. And we're going to present some solutions that can be provided through each of these scenarios. And I guess we'll pause for a moment to, if anyone wants to share some thoughts about the area and the risk context to make sure we're not missing anything. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Greg to run through our potential actions. I see a hand from Bill.
Yes, well, I put a question in the chat about Bayfront, and Kevin, you just said that area will be elevated. So how much will it be elevated, and how expensive is that going to be? And what about the whole area that's being redeveloped by NJCU?
Bill, I'm sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head of what the actual elevation for Bayfront will be. I know it's included in the Bayfront redevelopment plan, and I can follow up with you afterwards and get you the exact elevation if you need it. But I do know that it is going to be factored in like from the start before it becomes developed. They're already going to do that elevation of the site there.
And have they started work on the infrastructure there in Bayfront, to your knowledge?
My understanding is that the remediation is complete, and I think they may have also done some site work, including the elevation. But I don't know what other infrastructure and if any construction has begun. I also think it may start this year is the plan, but I'm not entirely sure. The last that I've seen, it's just some site work that's been completed.
And finally, what does CBO stand for? I see that in the circles here. Private individual CBO.
Community-based organizations, so groups like yourself.
Okay,
Neighborhood associations, environmental groups. We've just used CBO here to be all inclusive of any local community groups.
okay, thank you.
Yeah,
That's why it's important for you to join, and we're very happy to have you.
Great. So shall we get into it?
I think so. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to be walking through each scenario and how it hits the ground in our area. We're going to be walking through the physical actions, non-physical solutions, and some of the key changes that you would see in the neighborhood. Now, importantly, we are here to hear from all of you. So after we go through each scenario, we will have a stop slide where we want to hear your opinions, good, bad, otherwise. Again, this is your house. We're just here to do the work. So starting with scenario one, we call it individual initiative because individual city entities, agencies, and organizations are the main drivers of these actions. So essentially what is already within their wheelhouse, what is within their property portfolio, etc. So here we can see, starting with coastal solutions, Jersey City has already done a lot of background work here with the Jersey City adaptation plan. So we see a raised walkway proposed around Country Village, which already has a walkway. It's more a retrofit. Bayfront is raised itself, and a flood wall continuing up in between Lincoln Park and the Meadowlands. And then again, coming up and going towards the Meadowlands and PSE&G site. So this is already in progress. A lot of the background work has been done, but we're proposing both moving it forward and enhancing it with green infrastructure, other resilient practices so that it has a longer shelf life and actually contributes to the overall resilience, not just coastal of the area. Some areas that are left out, we are proposing that the city intervene, but in a way to help individual property owners protect themselves. So this could be regulations, grant assistance, financial assistance, etc. Also within the city agency purview, we can see stormwater separation up around the Holy Name Cemetery and Lincoln Park. These are two projects that are both within the realm that the city is already working in, and also building off of some of the LTCP projects, like this storage tank up here that will be in the future park that is being developed there. So in this scenario, Resilient New Jersey proposes the city being the arbiter of resilience, the main actor, and that does not mean acting alone. There is still conjunction with state, federal, etc., but the city is the main interface here. When we get to the heights, the city has less jurisdiction within the Meadowlands area, but we do still recognize that there is a high flood risk there. So similar to the areas left outside of protections a bit to the south, we would propose the city be the arbiter and the main driver of helping those industrial areas adapt to sea level rise, inundation, and rainfall flooding. In the heights, since most of the risk is limited to rainfall flooding, we see some main green infrastructure corridors, along which we propose both drainage and green infrastructure improvements. Drainage more so in some areas you can see indicated with the blue arrows. And again, in the heights, there is at least one unique feature that will help us immensely, and that is reservoir number 3. So proposing within the wheelhouse of the city, expanding the capacity and general workings of that reservoir to absorb more of the rainfall runoff. So as I stated, here are some of the main changes that you can see in your neighborhood with these interventions. You'll see as we step through the other scenarios that these ones feel a bit more limited, and essentially that's because we're working within the existing system. So we don't want to fully disrupt parks, streets, sidewalks, businesses. So we have things like these spring dams and improved water conveyance that can be built into existing systems. Also in possible conjunction with some of the Greenway projects, which becomes more explicit in some of our other scenarios, building resilience into, let's say, that the Hackensack Greenway project, and using existing parks and open spaces, reconfiguring them slightly to have a bit more retentive capability.
Greg, while you're paused here, can we just switch the interpreters?
Yep.
All right, we're all set. Thank you.
And then lastly, in this green infrastructure row, we can see some of the work that the city can drive themselves. Impermeable surfaces are a huge contributor to runoff and contribute to both localized flooding and downstream flooding. So as much pervious surface as we can create, the better. And right-of-way green infrastructure can be used along city-owned properties, roads, larger sidewalks, even some larger streets to incorporate both infiltration, retention, and also just a general slowing of the water to give the system a bit more time to react. So what does all this mean? Here we are breaking down a bit wordily the actions and the considerations that we should be thinking about when choosing a scenario or actions from the scenarios to go forward. So within the coastal protections here, it is left to the city and agencies, but there are many areas that are potentially left outside of those protections, particularly during a strong flood event. So we see that the key considerations are a bit of a mixed bag, but the main issue that we want to consider is, are we okay with these parts of the community being left out of the alignment? And are we okay with some critical services that are within those areas being cut off during storm events? In drainage improvements, some of the main factors with working within the existing system are that this work can be easily started, implemented by city agencies that already have, as we recently heard, many sewer separation projects going on. We also recognize that the LTCP is not necessarily built for additional resilience, but more so for CSO events. So potentially enhancing some of those projects within the LTCP to contribute to overall resilience as well. Some of the main issues to consider here, the current system during a large rain event, like the several that we saw last summer, may not be enough overall, and it involves a lot of pumping increases. It would also exceed treatment plant capacity, and we would have to work in other infrastructure elements. Lastly, for the green infrastructure, since it is mainly city-driven, we're looking at city-owned impervious surfaces. You can see in this little thumbnail map to the left, those pink areas are all publicly owned impervious surfaces, which are essentially the low-hanging fruit of the impervious surfaces, the ones we can address first, etc. However, the main issue to consider, green infrastructure cannot address everything. It can absorb some excess water. It can lessen flash flooding. So it needs to be in conjunction with some of these other elements, like the drainage elements in particular. However, it does tend to fall on the low and easy side of the key considerations. So now I'll turn it over to Mary to talk about the non-physical solutions.
Great, thank you, Greg. So in addition to those physical strategies that Greg walked through along as part of scenario one, we've also identified a range of more non-physical solutions, more like policies and programs that would complement those physical solutions. So in terms of providing coastal protection, there are some areas in this scenario that would be left outside of those coastal protections, like Greg mentioned. So this would be an area where policy or programs could be used to address the resiliency and the risks that exist in those areas, such as incorporating higher standards into development or having targeted outreach and technical assistance to property owners to advance retrofits for existing buildings. And then on the drainage improvement side, policies and programs like trash cleanups and catch basin programs, which came up in the chat earlier, is something that we were looking at here, as well as larger measures like developing a municipal stormwater utility to further incentivize green infrastructure across the city. And then also on green infrastructure, measures like tree programs and requiring green infrastructure on public open spaces, those sites that are within the control of the city would be is a key component of scenario one. So you can see we've also looked at a range of other different types of programs and policies that would also complement, but those are kind of like the main ideas that we wanted to highlight for this discussion. So questions, I think, like Megan put in the chat earlier, we're really at a point in the project where we have a lot of ideas, and we really want to know, from all these ideas, what sticks, what do you want us to pursue further? Are there things that you think are good ideas that we're missing here? And then we also have a few specific questions that we've identified. Are there specific streets or city properties that you would want to see transformed? Are there particular greening projects that appeal to you the most? And then also this concept of resilience hubs, which is this idea of having like one place where people can go as maybe an evacuation center, but more as like a community center that can provide information and resources around resilience. Are there certain locations where you think that would be necessary? And in general, what do you like about the scenario that we just walked through, and what do you dislike? Anyone want to jump in? Oh, I see a hand from Deborah. Oh, Deborah, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Still.
Okay. Sorry. All right. When you talk about green canopy, I assume that means planting of more trees on city property, sidewalks, etc. But one problem is, like, I live in an apartment building. I have 3 trees in front of our building. Okay, so I'm I'm retired, so it's become my job to sweep up all these leaves from these 3 trees. Where we have another property owner across the street, they don't clean their leaves. So the leaves end up going into the catch basin and the street. And when the street sweeper passes, sometimes it's so many leaves that they have to bring another truck because the leaves clog up the sweeper. That happened a couple of years ago. I sweep that up, but I also sweep the gutter because in talking with the street sweepers, they want people to sweep the gutter precisely for that reason. But if you put a lot of neighborhoods, you have trees on the sidewalk, but you don't have anybody to clean them. And a lot of the homeowners don't do it. The person that used to do it in my building, she's older now. So I've just I do it on a volunteer basis. But as I get older, I'm in my mid-60s. So as I get older, that's a problem. The city needs to initiate a program or needs to become part of this where the city sends out people to clean up the leaves off the sidewalk and the gutter and the catch basins, because a lot of residents are not going to do it for whatever reason. And that needs to be incorporated, because it's great to have all this green canopy stuff, but then if you have all the leaves clogging up everything, you're kind of defeating the purpose of why you want the green canopy.
Great. Yes, I think that's exactly like some of the feedback that we've heard before. And I think that kind of the idea around, having, sort of more of a program around street cleanup and catch basin cleanup. Great. Maybe we could put that into like what you like about scenario 1.
I guess you could, but with the caveat, but the city needs to have a serious program of, I guess, with city workers actually going throughout all the neighborhoods.
Okay.
I don't know if it periodically, whatever there, to clean up, because the city doesn't. Or they'll clean up just downtown, and the rest of the city, can go by the wayside for all they care. So it needs to be something that's real serious, that's implemented as part of this on a regular basis, not just catch can.
Yeah, I would say it sounds like a dislike. You like the green canopy, you dislike the potential downsides.
Yeah, however you guys want to phrase it. I don't know, you're better at that than I am.
Yeah, and Bill, there were some comments that you left in the chat too. About excluding parts of the community.
Yes, and environmental justice, I'm very sensitive to that. I would say in general, go for low-hanging fruit wherever possible. And certainly as a taxpayer, I'm mindful of the cost to the taxpayer, but I don't envy the people charged with making these decisions. It's a very complex problem, but I applaud the effort to seek opinions from a wide spectrum of the community. And resilience hubs, could you define those again, please?
Yeah, it's a broad concept, but the general idea is sort of like having a place where people can go, where there's resources around resiliency, learning about flood risk, what people can do. They also could serve as evacuation centers in the time of a flood. Are there other things that Kevin or Greg to add on to that?
I'm thinking, if I understand it properly, like almost like a community center, but like resources would be like available. A lot of times if there is sort of like a flooding event, like people might have questions like, what do I do? Like, who do I go to for help? Where can I get funding to, repair my house? And a neighborhood-based resilience hub would be like a local place in your community that you can go to help provide those answers. And, if there is, unfortunately some type of issue where you have to evacuate, hopefully the resilience hub would be a safe place where you can go until you can return home.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. We heard from the flooding last summer that there were FEMA resources available, but people either missed the window or didn't know where it was happening, etc. So this would be the place to go.
Thanks, Greg. A lot of times, a lot of these resources come from like a large agency, like the Federal Emergency Management Agency or like the state of New Jersey. And on a local level, people like may not be aware and know where to go. So we want to bring it to more like a neighborhood type scale.
There was a question in the chat from Anna about a system to warn residents when pumps are overloaded and cars have to be moved and maybe to evacuate. And that is something that we're also looking into, sort of like emergency evacuation strategies, and been coordinating with the emergency management community to understand better about what existing plans and strategies do include, and what else could be needed. So that's definitely something we're looking into. And Dawn, you have a hand up.
Hi. Yeah, so about those resilience centers. Two places that I've recommended for resilience centers are the PS 31 elementary school and also PS 23. Both of those schools had the playgrounds removed, were paved over for trailers to be installed years ago. For extended classrooms, those trailers have been removed by the city quite a few years ago, and now they've become parking lots. So instead of playgrounds, we have parking lots with our schools. With the advent of, all of these technologies, those should be playgrounds. They should be resilient playgrounds. They can be these centers that you're talking about, these resilience hubs. A resilient schoolyard would have nature-based play equipment, permeable surfaces, stormwater retention basins, rain gardens with educational signage, and the accompanying benefit of having a great education location. Why go on a field trip when you can go into your own playground and count caterpillars and study the effects of rain gardens to drain stormwater? It just seems like a no-brainer to me. Meanwhile, we have people parking at our schools. I understand the teachers feel that they need parking. Perhaps we could have teachers that don't need to drive to work. Or maybe we could have what the other cities have. Maybe we could have zones with special parking permits for teachers. I'm not a total monster, but truthfully, I have little patience with teachers parking for free at the school where my daughter goes, and she needs to have a place to go outside. The kids really deserve it. They deserve to have an experience with native plants and beneficial insects and butterflies, bees. They need to be able to sit outside under a tree and identify birds. I mean, it just seems ludicrous to me that we trade this for parking. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, those are great ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, so resilience hubs at schools, parking lots need to be playgrounds. And when I say playground, I don't mean a plastic play gym with, impermeable surface. I mean permeable surface and possibly playscape instead of a plastic playground. Natural materials, logs, stones, earth and hills, things like that. Okay, thank you.
Great. No, thank you.
Can we take a moment to switch interpreters?
Yeah, maybe just in the interest of time, we should move on to the next scenario now too, Greg.
I was going to say that next.
Okay, and we're switched with interpreters.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to scenario 2. Whereas scenario 1 was about individual responsibility being a bit siloed, scenario 2 opens up shared responsibility, essentially driven by public-private partnerships and/or partnerships among agencies that don't normally talk, the city and CBOs, etc. So this opens up for green infrastructure, for example, where we were just looking at city properties, right-of-way green infrastructure along city roads. This opens up the opportunity for green infrastructure to expand off of those, to expand our impact, and potentially through these partnerships, expand the funding available. So as you can see, we're looking at areas like the mall, the larger industrial areas over there, some of the larger parking lots, which we were just discussing. And it would still essentially run through the city, but through these partnerships, we open up many more opportunities. For example, along the coast, where we had the raised walkway on Country Village, ending at 440. This is partially because it was originally proposed there by Jersey City, but NJDOT essentially said 440 is too close to the water. We don't think we can do it. So through a partnership with NJDOT and a close partnership, not just trying to tell them what to do, we would propose reconfiguring that area of 440, both to potentially raise it or do some sort of off or flood wall or offshore structure, but also that would be able to be incorporated again into the Hackensack River Greenway, which is running along 440 there as well. The interest of time, I'm going to do this one a bit faster. So here we also would propose partnering with the property owner of the PSE&G site, potentially turning that critical site at the sort of nexus of Jersey City and the Meadowlands into potentially a retention park, somewhere that can maybe use and even celebrate the water, but also potentially protecting it to create an asset in this area that is sorely lacking one. There is also a substation that is still on this property that we would want to protect as a piece of key infrastructure. In the Heights, where again, it's more about rainfall flooding, we would propose a distributed network of retention within the parks. So retention areas essentially can be either underground, they can be under parking lots and hold excess water there, or they can be open air and be more like a retention pond or the reservoir. So directing excess stormwater to these retention areas, again, through partnerships. Not all of these parks are city owned. There's also county and state parks within here. So partnerships not only among city agencies, but also city, county, state, et cetera, working together towards one shared goal, shared responsibility for the problem. So what might these things look like? At the coastal protections, we can see like this example showing riprap, rich revetments, some areas that can be a bit more built up with, again, more funding, and also partnerships are pretty essential for creating alignments along the coast, as not one entity owns all of the coastal land in any of these areas. You can also see something like the raised and reinforced roadway in conjunction with NJDOT, using our existing infrastructure and disrupting it as little as possible. And then for the drainage improvements, again, more funding, partnerships, slightly larger projects. And again, looking at them within these park areas. So you can see some examples where a boardwalk is over retention areas. This also helps to filter the runoff before it goes out into the waterways. Again, a partnership with someone like NJDOT would allow for using the right-of-way green infrastructure within these larger streets like 440 and putting in something to slow the water, filter the water, get it out of the CSO system as much as possible. And then lastly, on green infrastructure down here, opening it up to private properties and these other partnerships, we can see public-private parks in basically private plazas that are strictly for resilience purposes, but also add in the co-benefits of creating these park spaces. And somewhat more importantly, opening up the possibility of green and blue roof programs on these larger roofs, particularly in the industrial areas and some of the larger like retail areas within the west side. So we'll do this a bit quicker too. The coastal protections that we just talked about shift us a bit more towards the high and hard side. Again, we would have partnerships as a potential relief for that, for funding and logistics. But yeah, as it says right there, the issues to consider: extending the protections, which also would leave no one out in this situation, as we would coordinate with the property owners to fill in gaps. It requires a lot more coordination with agencies, property owners at all levels, but that is the thrust of this scenario. Drainage improvements here, again, a bit of a mixed bag. They get a little bit more costly, but the level of protection goes up. So again, the potential issue to consider here has a lot to do with funding and coordination for the benefits of the scenario to be realized. Green infrastructure, again, will tend to be on the cheaper side, but will have less of a meaningful impact on larger events. And not only that, once we start multiplying out these green infrastructure projects on public property, private property, et cetera, that's a lot more assets that need to be maintained. Similar to the catch basins and the leaf issue that Deborah was just talking about. There's a greater number of inspections, a greater overall coordination needs to be put in place there as well. And back to Mary.
Thanks, Greg. So on the non-physical solutions under this scenario, on sort of coastal side of things, more deeper sort of larger advancements through deeper collaboration with community members, schools, and community-based organizations. That can include, sort of the resilience hub idea that we were talking about in the last scenario, but having, sort of greater role for community organizations as part of that resilience hub. And then on drainage improvements, sort of leveraging partnerships with composting and trash cleanup to help reduce the clogging of the drainage system. And so thinking about like how groups that the city could partner with, outside of agencies to really kind of advance those types of programs. And then similarly on green infrastructure, thinking about public-private partnerships to expand the types of green infrastructure that could be implemented. So like we talked about the last scenario, I want to hear sort of, what do you like, what do you not like about some of the ideas that we talked about in this scenario, and also particular some of those same questions as they related to last scenario as well. But any of the things that Greg walked through, are there things that seem like a benefit in this scenario as opposed to the last scenario, or anything that came up as like a new thing in this scenario that you particularly like or dislike? And Deborah, your hand is up. Is that a new hand?
Oh, that must have been the old hand. I don't know how to get, I don't know. Oh, there it is. Lower hand. Okay. I got it.
Well, while you're off mute, any reactions to this scenario?
Not really. No.
That's a lot of content.
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from any of our participants if they have something they want to say, but I'll just mention that that stormwater median is like the coolest thing I've seen. We talked a lot about leaf litter and trash, and so we'll definitely have to make sure to keep them clean. And I'll also mention that a lot of our corridors are very physically constrained, so it's tough, but I love that idea. I see some hands I saw Dawn first and then Bill, so let's turn it over to our participants.
Something I didn't really hear much about that I'd love to hear more about is more of the use of everyday public space. Street corners, hell strips, anything like that. It should all be jam-packed with habitat plants. It should all be full of native plantings. if we're at all responsible. I mean, you showed on the maps how close we are in my particular neighborhood, right near the Pulaski in Journal Square Northwest. I'm extremely close to the Hackensack River. And all of our stormwater from our entire neighborhood, including the Pulaski Skyway, overruns these retentions, these minimal retentions that are there. The streets are running in water. Our outfall on SIP is completely inundated, totally outdated. So I guess that'll be part of the drainage improvement. But in the meantime, there's plenty of ideas that have been proposed for improvements that'll benefit the public right beneath the Pulaski Skyway. A number of people propose different things, a park, a bicycle park, a skateboard park. Recently, some of us got together and proposed a resilient dog park for underneath the Pulaski over there, right off of St. Paul's. And that would be extremely beneficial to be able to absorb some of the stormwater and even retain some of the stormwater coming off of the Pulaski Skyway, instead of it just inundating our outfall that goes right to the Hackensack River. I mean, it's pretty serious. What else? Yeah, and then, so we are so close to the Hackensack River. That means that whatever habitat we put together, whatever native plantings we can install, they will benefit wildlife to be able to move through our city. We need to create these little daisy chain of habitat to bring wildlife from the Hackensack River to Lincoln Park West, up and over to Liberty State Park. And in the meantime, I live in a sea of concrete, green roofs, all of it, terrific, wonderful. We have to do something that also benefits wildlife. I mean, I love all these retentions and all that other stuff, but it's got to have habitat plantings on top of it. I'll put something in the chat. I have a link for a proposal, a petition that went around for a resilient dog park underneath the Pulaski. And we couldn't even get a feasibility study approved. You know, it's kind of crazy.
All right, thanks. Yeah,
Thank you
we'll
so
look
much.
into that.
Yeah.
And yeah, great ideas. I think the good potential of sort of thinking about these greenways is not just stormwater management, but like habitat connections as well. Love that. Bill, I think you were next.
Yes. Well, I would echo what Dawn just said, particularly for wildlife. And I remember when she spoke to our Green Committee at the Journal Square Community Association about the dog park. I thought that was a wonderful idea. But just one other suggestion I would have for resilience hubs, that churches could, and as well as schools, could potentially serve as resilience hubs in times when evacuation is needed. I would also like to ask what is meant by blue roofs. I think Greg mentioned that. I know what green roofs are, but what are blue roofs?
Yeah, I can take that one. So blue roofs are essentially retention areas on top of buildings. So you wet proof it and essentially hold the water open on the roof. It helps both with heat island because of evaporation, but also does retain the water up there and then slowly releases it back into the system. So similar to green, but without the planting.
Thank you.
All right. Since we are now 2 minutes over time, feel free to exit the meeting if you would like, but we are going to scenario 3 next, which is maybe the most exciting. So stay tuned.
Before we do that, Greg,
Yep.
let's just pause for the translators. Okay, we're switched.
Cool. Okay, so scenario 3, I think actually takes a lot of the ideas that we've heard that we have all agreed are great ideas and moves them a little bit farther forward. We call this one regional coordination, not only because we would propose a regional coordinating entity that would insert green infrastructure projects throughout the region, would interface with each city, the agencies, et cetera, to make sure green infrastructure and resilience projects are incorporated throughout. Since it is also regional coordination, a lot of the focus has to do with connectivity. There are a lot of ways to get around these cities. However, not many of them are bike or pedestrian friendly, etc. That's why in particular in this area, there are 3 proposed greenways that would run through. So we not only propose latching onto and pushing forward those greenway projects, but pushing them forward as resilient greenway projects, green infrastructure corridors, potentially ecological corridors, particularly when we get up into the meadowlands, etc. So to point out the proposed greenways quickly, we have the Morris Canal Greenway, which comes over from Newark, runs up 440 and then down across Jersey City along the old Morris Canal line. We have the oft mentioned so far Hackensack River Greenway, which runs more along the coast and can be integrated with our coastal protections, raised walkways, etc., projects that are already happening that we can insert more resilience into. And then lastly, at the northern edge here, we have the Essex Hudson Greenway, which terminates by the Pulaski Skyway up here, and another proposal that we'll talk about more in the Heights for the Arches, which is the old sunken rail line up there. Outside of coordination with greenways, we propose many more wetland restorations in the area. This, under the regional umbrella, can be seen as a larger program like a Newark Bay Living Shoreline program, where the whole entire Newark Bay is looked at holistically. So sites are selected and pushed forward by a regional entity, of course, in coordination with the cities and local property owners, but the vision is more regional. And not only that, but we know that wetlands help clean water and filter water on its way back out into these water bodies, which will help the whole entire region have cleaner waterways as a whole. I will also mention quickly, because of the regional nature, we expand the drainage a bit through more funding, coordination, shared expertise, etc. And similarly with the green infrastructure on streets. Up here, we have on the Meadowlands side, again, the potential to utilize that site and the PSENG X coal site. And also there are 2 greenways that are potentially proposing enclosing the site physically, the Essex Hudson and the Hackensack River. So if we can utilize those greenway projects and implementations, we really like the concept of big once. We want multi-purpose infrastructure. We want it to have co-benefits for people, nature, and most of all, for the reason that we're all here, city resilience. In the Heights here, we have similar retention areas that hold water, maybe hold less water or hold water for less time, but in general, to go along with the Greenway integration, we direct water to this, the embankments to the south, which would help create new pathways for the water and somewhat more natural pathways where it wants to go, as that is a railway. We can go through these quickly. Again, the infrastructure scales up a bit here. We can see more integration of public spaces, etc. The regional coordinating entity would, again, work with the cities, but have a lot more resources for these things to be possible, similar to how we as Resilient New Jersey have a larger, or Resilient Northeastern New Jersey have a larger picture and greater collective expertise. We can see something like floodable public infrastructure, which the example is Domino Park in Brooklyn. And then things like the stormwater conveyance and retention, wetlands at the coast, can also be expanded. These are very aesthetic views that we would propose along the greenways, which again would begin to reconnect this whole entire region that has arguably been split up by infrastructure for decades. So looking at this, obviously this coastal protection running up the whole entire coast, leaving no one out, integrated with co-benefits, gets a little pricey. The key considerations go towards high and hard, but it does offer the greatest level of protection. It would require extensive coordination, but that is the thrust of this scenario. Looking at drainage, again, we just talked about a lot of this. It does get into the high and hard side of all of our metrics, and required land use changes for surface conveyance, managing the redevelopment sites and private sector would all be an added wrench in the gears. And then lastly, looking at the green infrastructure, there would need to be a concerted effort to actually get these wetlands, this potential Newark Bay living shoreline project off the ground. There would need to be changes to existing uses. Some things are a bit more construction intensive, etc. But we do see the benefits as greater again. Mary.
Thanks, Greg. So on the non-physical solutions, the name of the game here is regional coordination. So one of the policy and programmatic recommendations we have would be actually to continue the Resilient Northeastern New Jersey program to continue to build on the momentum of this planning process, and continue to implement the plan. We also think that a regional infrastructure coordination council will be necessary to help maximize resilience and planned infrastructure improvements, as well as limit disruption to communities. And then also with this regional approach, establishing more of a regional network of resilience hubs in partnership with community-based organizations and municipalities, but have it be more of a network that could share resources in times of a disaster as well. So really, it's about kind of like putting in place that kind of like regional scale governance and coordination that would really be necessary to both to advocate for the level of funding that would be necessary for this scenario, as well as implement projects that span jurisdictions of agencies and municipalities. There was a question in the chat about the second scenario being more expensive, but having more benefits. And yes, that is likely true. We have begun to develop some very high level cost estimates for these scenarios. And they do, as you can kind of guess, probably like kind of scale towards, more costly as we go from the first scenario to the third. But we're also involving, additional entities within the scenarios. And so those costs would be spread out over multiple entities as well, and, come from a variety of sources, and also come with greater benefits as well. So I know we're over time, but would love if people want to stick around to let us know what you like about scenario 3, or anything that came out, anything that you would flag, also anything that concerns you about this scenario. And then also, yeah, Greg, I think we can move to the questions that we had on the other slide too, or just, what out of everything we've talked about seems like the most important thing to advance? And is there anything that you want to make sure does not happen too? Yeah, and I hear you. We will need to convince all the residents about the costs and how these things will benefit the average resident. Bill, you have a question? Comment?
Yeah, well, just in terms of the most important thing to advance, I guess, is just to take the focus initially, as I said before, on low-hanging fruit, the projects which would have the most environmental benefits and also be most cost efficient. However, at the same time, making sure that we're not committing environmental injustice in so doing. And I realize that these are tricky issues, but I just want to applaud all of you for organizing this, and I found the discussion, the contributions from a lot of people very informative.
Well, thank you. Any other comments or questions about this final scenario, as well as, you know, anything that you saw tonight? Thank you for sticking around a little bit late too. Something in the chat about making sure people in the community are aware of those upcoming changes. That's a great point. I think, you know, we try to get the word out as much as we can, but you know, letting us know about sort of like other ways that you think that would be necessary. And glad to hear that it seems like we're on the right track, and making sure the city keeps a commitment regarding these proposals. I think, you know, the idea with the kind of, you know, developing the master plan and also, or the action plan, and then, you know, also having like continued coordination beyond the plan is to really sort of keep the momentum and keep advancing these ideas.
I'll add to that. I liked continuation of Resilient New Jersey program. In my experience in this type of work, you know, there's really no other program that allows us to have this coordination across the region. You know, hopefully that will, you know, help to keep pushing to, you know, keep commitments, not drop them later on. I love how Bill had mentioned the low-hanging fruit, but based on the scale of the problem, you know, sometimes things can really only be achieved through a larger partnership. And so, you know, having a bigger regional effort adds more, you know, bargaining power for funding and things like that. And I also liked the idea of the Regional Infrastructure Coordination Council, and just in general, you know, it's the city, it's the county, it's the state, but, you know, it's also our community-based organizations, it's our residents. Like, we want to keep up the good work, but we, like, you know, this is such a valuable meeting. We want to have more like this. We want to continue to work with you and we want to ask you to keep telling us what's best, what, you know, any issues that you may have, and keep, you know, pushing everyone to do more and to do better.
Thank you, Kevin. I think that's a great place to end it, unless anyone has any other questions or anything else they would like to raise. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone. And I dropped the link in the chat to a survey just to let us know what you thought of this meeting. I'll send it again right now. So please let us know what you thought.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
And if you
Thank
guys still would like to chat more with us, we do have another session starting at 6:30. So you are welcome to come and join us on that one as well. The link is on our website.
And stay in touch. We'll be, you know, posting through social media, on the website, and we do have one more community meeting coming up that we're looking to schedule now for, you know, potentially May, June, where we're going to be showing our action plan. So we hope that you stay in touch. Keep talking with us.